Our second speaker for the proposition is Laura Smith. Laura served as Labour Member of Parliament for Crewe and Outwich from 2017 to 2019 and is a current councillor in the Borough of Cheshire. She's a strong supporter of the trade union movement, calling for a general strike in 2018. Laura, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Now, I must say before I get started that I rarely took points of information in Parliament, so I wouldn't waste too much of your time. I'm going to get through my points. It is very, very apparent to me when talking to my friends and my family that the economic struggle is not only very real, but already here for many people in their homes and in their workplaces. After a decade of low growth and near zero interest rates, inflation is back big time. Now, of course, the war in Ukraine, combined with the rampant profiteering of the fossil fuel companies, alongside our slowness to transition to clean energy, have kept fuel prices high, and there are real supply shocks that are driving up the costs of the basics, including food. But it's worth remembering that because our energy system operates in the private interest, companies will make excess profits of 170 billion in the next 2 years. And with the greatest respect, sir, I would say that is who needs to be hit with the cost. At the same time, even though wholesale prices are going down, we will likely be paying more on our bills next year compared to this. This is a phenomenon called sticky prices by economists because prices rapidly go up in response to increased costs, but are not so quick to fall when those costs decline. It's also worth noting that because the government has subsidised the already highly profitable energy companies, we are in fact paying for the fuel bills crisis twice, through our consumer bills and through public spending. That old take a tenner, pay back a fiver, and want a pat on the back trick. Another factor that we must concede is that import prices are still being affected, and the global value chains that link the extraction of resources and the production of goods in the global south, when consumer markets in the global north still haven't returned to pre-pandemic operations. And once again, the lack of real thinking on the climate catastrophe means this is unlikely to get better. In fact, what we will see is far more climate-related production issues in the future, and combined with the real humanitarian crisis of a massive increase in climate refugees. But even acknowledging all those factors, the real underlying problem is actually corporate profiteering. Prices are increasing under the guise of uncontrollable inflation, simply because companies can make more money if they raise them, whilst hiding behind the real factors driving what should be a far more modest increase in costs. The trend applies to everything from breakfast cereal to rent. I spent quite a long time the other day in Sainsbury's talking to a lovely lady about the cost of toilet roll. £7 for the own brand in Sainsbury's now. Now, you can speak in a moment, but you've had your chance. It is in the nature of capitalism that corporations, driven by competition and the profit motive, will look at any means to make their buck. This is also what is causing many landlords to nibble their nails and join the profiteering, because the market is making me, not because they can't actually pay their own bills. Because prices are sticky and because there isn't actually real competition in many of the so-called markets, we are talking about corporations like energy firms and big supermarket chains not sacrificing their profits voluntarily. They will have to be forced to do so by us, the public. So rather than everyone getting all upset about a mythical wage price spiral, think about it logically. How can wages be driving up costs when wages have been stagnant for so long and pay packets are falling so far behind the costs of basic necessities? Let's talk about the profit price spiral and how we can break it in our favour. Concentrated corporate power is part of what is driving up prices, and record corporate profits prove it. To break this profit price spiral, we must strike at this power in key sectors of the economy. And this would involve increasing corporation taxes and income taxes for the richest, and actually enforcing that those taxes are being collected. To sum all this up, a spotlight has now been shone on all the economic injustices that we have endured over the past 4 decades. Neoliberal capitalism means unprecedented wealth extraction from the economy, not wealth creation. That was higher in the preceding decades, which was more equal then, and the concentration of that wealth in the hands of an ever smaller elite, and at the cost of a decaying planet. It's simply unsustainable. But nevertheless, the government's decided to return to the failed austerity economics of Cameron and Osborne. Just as families and businesses need more support to survive, the government has put the brakes on its spending. But don't worry, don't worry at all, because they sorted out all their associates with crooked PPE contracts to the tune of tens of billions of pounds. The idea that employment and worker bargaining power are too high and that this is what is driving inflation is truly absurd. Wages for the British worker have been stagnant for the longest period since the Napoleonic Wars. Even when there was productivity, it has long been decoupled from wages, exploding the mythical nonsense that hard work is the road to success. Bonuses for bankers, while key workers are forced to turn to food banks, has destroyed the belief that what you are paid is simply a measure of what you are worth to the market, a notion that has become ever more offensive. And this is why the ideas of trade unions is so frightening to some. As a 40-year-old failed experiment in neoliberal economics comes grinding to a halt in crisis and disarray, the prospect of collective action to force change threatens everything that they represent. As picket lines increase across sectors and spread across the country, with more and more workers turning to industrial action in the greatest strike wave since the 1970s, as NHS workers, civil servants, postal workers, firefighters, railway workers, educators ballot to withdraw their labour, the servants of capital in Parliament and the shameless sycophants in the media are shoving through legislation attacking the public's right to strike. And they are acting now because the reasons for workers to strike are only going to increase. Household income is set to fall by a further 3.8% on average in 2023, an even bigger hit than in 2022. Pensions and benefits continue to erode, while public services like the NHS are crumbling from years of underfunding, private profiteering and extraction. People, unsurprisingly, are not dashing to join those professions as they no longer pay. Trade union members and their leaders, the key workers, are therefore on the very front lines of defending our living standards and our public services, which is why the government and the Tory press must make them the enemy. Tory politicians and the Governor of the Bank of England have urged us not to ask for more pay, warning that it will lead to a wage price spiral which will make inflation even worse. Dishing out this sort of advice on austerity when you are on a 6-figure salary takes a certain level of hypocrisy. As fat cats go, they don't come much fatter than our rulers today. But besides the obvious hypocrisy, the argument also makes little economic sense. The most important argument to tackle the claim that was made before and will be made later, I'm sure, that higher wages cause inflation is a simple look at the facts. Real wages, which mean inflation adjusted, have fallen. They've not risen for more than a decade, and so has workers' shares of income compared to capitals since the 2008 crisis. Now, I could go on about this, but I'm going to get to this bit because I've had a 1-minute warning. Members of the Cambridge Union, blaming workers for the crisis, burdening workers with the bills for austerity and bullying workers into submission is not an innocent error. It is a calculated, callous, conservative government con trick. Let's tell it as it is. The Tories have crucified this country, and now they have the gall, the audacity, the brass neck to tell you there is no alternative. Corporate greed, Tory policy and the right-wing press are the bane of our lives. Effective trade unions, communities sticking together, stepping up to fight for social justice can be the engines of progressive change. We need strong trade unions more than at any other time in my life, in your lives. Send a message to this wretched, cruel and corrupt government. Pass this motion by a whopping majority and join the fight back for a fairer Britain. Thank you.